Hello chess fans, this is Rick from Chess to Impress. Only 8 days and it will all kick off in London. On Friday, November 9th, the first game will be played between Magnus Carlsen and Fabiano Caruana for the world title. And on Chess to Impress we continue the countdown by looking at the first 46 matches for the World Championship. This is number 40 in that series. We've arrived in 2007. In the previous video we saw the chess world being reunited after Garry Kasparov walked away from the World Chess Organization in 1993. There were 13 years of rivalry world championships, but it had all been reunited when Vladimir Kramnik, the classical world champion, beat Veselin Topalov, the FIDE world champion. But it did not mean that things would get more simple, at least not in the short term. 2007, the year after the reunification match, saw a world championship tournament. So not Vladimir Kramnik defending his title against a challenger in a match. We had a tournament. Let's see how that one came about. The 2005 FIDE World Championship had been a double round-robin tournament, and soon after that event FIDE announced that the 2007 World Championship would have the same format. But then in 2006 the reunification match Kramnik-Topalov was held, won by Kramnik, and FIDE stated that if Kramnik defeated FIDE champion Topalov, which he did, he would take Topalov's place in the 2007 tournament. Then in June 2007, Kramnik confirmed that he recognized the 2007 tournament as the World Championship. Thank goodness he did, otherwise we would have had a new problem. And then FIDE announced that future World Championships, beginning in 2008, would be decided by matches between a champion and a challenger. FIDE also announced that as compensation for being denied entry to the 2007 tournament, Topalov would have special privileges in the 2010 World Championship cycle. I hope you're still with me, hope you understand all this, it's quite complex. The 2007 World Championship tournament had 8 participants. Vladimir Kramnik from Russia, who was there as the reigning world champion. 3 players qualified by being in the top 4 of the 2005 event. Those were Anand, Svitler and Morozevich. And then 4 players qualified through the Candidates Tournament, which was a very complex affair in itself. Leko, Gelfand, Aronian and Grishuk qualified. And it was interesting that Aronian defeated 16-year-old Magnus Carlsen in the first round of the Candidates matches. Aronian needed a tiebreak to defeat Carlsen. Let's look at a game from the 2007 World Championship Tournament. From round 2, where Levon Aronian played Viswanathan Anand. Let's get into it. It was played on the 14th of September 2007. White Aronian, black Anand. Round 2 of the World Championship Tournament, and I used the comments from the analysis from Anand's second, Peter Heine Nielsen, in the magazine New in Chess. And it's interesting that Peter Heine Nielsen will be Magnus Carlsen's second in the Carlsen-Caruana match. Anand had been white in game 1, and Nielsen writes that with a Petrov game the day before against Gelfand and a Petrov coming up the day after, round 2 against Kramnik, Anand felt the need for some action. And Aronian played d4, and let's see what Anand had in store. Knight f6, c4, e6, knight f3, d5, Queen's Gambit, knight c3, and c6, the semi-Slav. Here e3 is what Aronian usually played against a semi-Slav, but for this World Championship he had prepared some new ideas and came up with bishop g5 on the 5th move. h6, and now bishop takes f6, queen takes, and e3 is the calm approach, protecting the pawn on c4. But here Aronian played bishop h4, and Nielsen writes, quite a surprise, but a pleasant one, at least for the spectators. Aronian plays the anti-Moscow gambit, which was played 5 times in this tournament. White is giving up the pawn on c4. That's the gambited pawn. Anand took it. e4, g5, bishop g3, and b5. Black hangs on to the pawn on c4. And here bishop e2 is the normal move, but Aronian had prepared knight e5. And Nielsen writes a very rare move. It seems dubious to centralize the knight instead of finishing his development, but the possibility to play an early h4 or queen f3, depending on the circumstances, seems to justify white's approach. And here bishop g7 was played in a game between Kazimjanov against Anand a month before the World Championship. White obtained a promising position after this move, and Anand had done his homework. Instead of bishop g7, he played h5 in this position. h4 from Aronian, g4, and bishop e2, transposing into a position that had been seen in Grandmaster practice before. Anand developed the bishop to b7, and here f3 had been tried by Garry Kasparov in a game against Alexei Dreyev, but Aronian castled. Knight bd7, queen c2, knight takes e5, bishop takes, bishop g7, and rook a d1, which Nielsen calls quite cautious. Bishop g3 was played in the same tournament by Alexander Grishuk in his game against Peter Svidler in round 6, and this move is very aggressive. White sacrifices a second pawn to keep black's king in the middle. That game went as follows. There goes a second pawn, rook fd1, queen c5, and bishop d6, played by Grishuk, keeping black's king in the middle of the board. But rook ad1 was played by Aronian in this game. Anand castled, bishop back to g3, knight to d7, and f3 by Aronian. And Nielsen writes, just a few days before the tournament, Anand felt that the preparation against this move had been somewhat weak, so they invested some more time in this variation. And it was a good use of time because it came on the board as early as round 2. Here queen b6 had been the only move tried in this position, but Anand played c5, the fruit of his preparation. Nielsen writes, this seems counterintuitive. Why should black be able to attack white's center immediately? And also the engine didn't like it, but the more we looked at it, the more we started to believe in black's resources. Aronian took on c5, and now queen e7, and Nielsen says this is the point of black's play. From e7 the queen keeps an eye on the h4 pawn, this one, and the queen being closer to its own king than on b6, where it went in the variation we just saw, gives some added security for black. Here Aronian played king h1 after a long think, and he decides against any of the forced lines, which I will show you now. There are a few forced lines here. Rook d6 looks very strong, but then Nielsen says they had prepared a6, and white is not winning a piece as the rook gets trapped. This is the variation that Nielsen shows. c6 looks like it's winning a piece because it's forking both bishop and knight, but then bishop takes, rook takes, knight e5 hitting the rook, rook b6, queen a7 pinning the rook, bishop f2, g3 hitting the bishop, bishop e3, and then queen e7. And Nielsen writes that white gets mated here. The agent doesn't think so, but agrees that this is better for black. So that's one of the forced variations, rook d6. Another one is bishop d6. Looks very strong, but then black takes on h4. And don't think you can take the rook, because then you get checkmated. Let's have a look. g3, rook fe1, and mate in 2. This is checkmate. So after bishop d6, queen takes h4, you have to play g3 to make sure you don't get checkmated. Then queen h3, rook f2, and knight e5. And Nielsen writes, as black's queen does not get trapped, he is winning. The third variation that Nielsen shows here is f takes g4. Then queen takes c5 check, bishop f2, queen c6, g takes h5, and knight e5. And Nielsen writes this leads to a position that's quite typical for this line. White has an extra pawn, but black's pieces are very harmoniously placed and give excellent compensation for the pawn. So we have seen three variations after queen e7. We have seen rook d6, we've seen bishop d6, and we have seen f takes g4. Very complex variations, but I wanted to show them to you to give a little insight in Anand's preparation, as Nielsen shares in that magazine New in Chess. Aronian, after a long think, chose a fourth option, king h1. Anand played a6, a4, and bishop c6, which Nielsen calls a key move. Black keeps his structure intact, and there is no way for white to explain the fact that the bishop on c6 seems a bit loose. Here f takes g4 is the best move according to Nielsen, but Aronian played knight d5, and that's not a good move according to Nielsen. And again, it's very complicated. Anand took the piece, e takes d5, and the idea is to regain the piece. If the bishop retreats, bishop b7, c6 wins back the piece for white. But after e takes d5, Anand did not retreat the bishop, he played bishop e5. And Nielsen writes, it's not clear if Aronian had missed this move or underestimated it. He now has to go into a setup where both his bishops are basically dead. Let's see what happens. White cannot regain the piece, he cannot take on c6, because then you get checkmated after bishop takes g3. This leads to checkmate. Also, bishop takes e5 is not good, because then there's queen takes h4 check, king g1, knight takes e5, takes that bishop, and if you now regain your piece, there is g3, and white will get checkmated again. So regaining the piece that way is not possible, and the only option here is f4. Bishop back to g7, and now Aronian regains the piece. But after knight takes c5, black has an advantage. Anand himself said after the game that this position is a good picture of black's strategy. His pawns completely cramp, white's bishop on e2, and the other bishop on g3 is not faring much better. We often see the bishop pair being very strong, but not in this game. Aronian played rook d5, knight e4, bishop e1, and queen e6. And now if the rook retreats, then black will take on c6. Here a takes b5 was white's last chance to put up some resistance, sacrificing a rook for two connected pass pawns. Queen takes d5, bishop takes c4, but then queen d4, and white's pawns aren't that dangerous. But after queen e6, Aronian did not take on b5, he took on h5. And after f5, that rook is now cut off. King h2, rook ac8, bishop b4, attacking the rook on f8, the rook stepped aside, a takes, rook e1, and queen f7. Attacking the rook has no squares, no safe squares that is, rook g5, that rook got taken, f takes g5, and rook takes c6. Black now has an extra exchange, and this bishop on e2 is still a horrible piece. Bishop f1, the rooks were swapped, and rook e6. Bishop c3, queen c7 check, g3, the rook infiltrates in white's position, queen g2, the bishops got swapped, and f4. A check from Aronian that is move 40, the time control was made, king g7 and queen a6. But the last move of the game was f takes g3 check, and Levon Aronian resigned. Anand had his first win in this World Championship tournament, and a win with the black pieces goes a long way in an event like this. Why did Aronian resign? Is it all over? Yes, it is. The king is in check, so king g2, then queen f7, threatening queen f2, with a very quick checkmate. White only has one move, queen h6 check. King g8 is the only move, and then white has to swap the queens to stay alive. Queen takes, g takes, but then black takes the pawn on c3, and with an extra exchange and 2 connected pass pawns, this game is over. As Nielsen writes, a nice energetic game by Anand, who kept up this level of play throughout the event. And Anand went on to win the event with 9 points out of 14 games. He had already been world champion, the FIDE world champion that is, in the year 2000, but now he was the 15th official and undisputed world champion in the history of the game. Kramnik had lost his title. He finished 1 point behind Anand, together with Boris Gelfand in second place. Leko was 4th, Svidler 5th, Morozevich and Aronian shared 6th place, and Alexander Grishuk finished bottom of the pile. Anand could not rest on his laurels for very long. It was the year after that he had to defend his title against the previous world champion Vladimir Kramnik, and I will tell you about that match in the next video. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. Please subscribe to the Chess to Impress channel and please leave a comment. If you like the video, if you like the series, it would be great if you could share it on social media by clicking the share button on YouTube. I hope you will keep counting down towards Carlsen-Caruana with me. The link to the series is here. This is Rick for Chess to Impress. Thank you for watching.